The dinner rush had just started at the Grand Oak restaurant, and the soft glow of chandeliers made the polished floors shine. The place was the kind of restaurant where the wine list was longer than the food menu, where the guests wore clothes that looked too expensive to spill anything on. At the far end, a small stage with an old grand piano sat quietly. No one had touched it in months. It was more decoration than an instrument now, a piece of the restaurant's charm for the kind of customers who liked to feel like they were dining somewhere with class. Among the staff moving quickly from table to table was Anna, carrying a tray of sparkling water and fresh bread. She had been working here for almost 2 years, ever since her mother's health had gotten worse and the bills had doubled. She worked hard, kept her head down, and didn't speak much to the guests unless she had to. For her, this job wasn't about dreams or career. It was survival. That night, the owner was hosting a private dinner for a special guest. People whispered his name, Mr. Caldwell, a millionaire who owned hotels, ships, and who knows what else. He had that kind of presence that made everyone around him act a little different. Even the owner, who normally barked orders at the staff, was suddenly polite, his voice soft when speaking to him. Anna had seen people like Caldwell before, men who believed their money gave them the right to treat others however they wanted. She didn't expect to interact with him much, so she stayed focused on her tables, quietly refilling drinks and clearing plates. But as she walked past the piano, balancing a tray, Caldwell's voice cut through the air. "Are you there?" he said, his tone sharp but playful in a way that wasn't really playful at all. Anna stopped, unsure if he was talking to her. "Yes, sir?" she asked politely. He leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine in his glass. "Do you know how to play that thing?" he asked, nodding toward the piano. Her stomach tightened. She hadn't played in years. Back in high school, she had been the kind of girl who stayed after class to practice in the music room until the janitor told her to leave. But life had a way of changing priorities. When her father passed away and her mother got sick, the piano became a memory, something she didn't have time for anymore. "I used to," she said softly, hoping that would be enough to end the conversation. But Caldwell wasn't done. "Used to? Well, now's your chance. Go on, play something for us." A ripple of laughter went around the table. The guests were dressed in suits and shimmering dresses, their faces already flushed from expensive wine. To them, it was harmless fun. To Anna, it felt like a spotlight was burning on her back. She gave a polite smile, the kind you wear when you don't want to start trouble. "I'm working right now, sir." "Come now," Caldwell interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. "It's just a little entertainment. Surely you can manage a song. We could use a laugh." The way he said it, "we could use a laugh," told her everything. This wasn't about music. This was about putting her on the spot, about watching the waitress fumble and fail. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill, placing it on the piano lid. "Play something, and it's yours." The other guests chuckled, one of them muttering, "Easy money." Anna felt heat rising in her face. It wasn't the money that bothered her, it was the way it was offered, like he was buying her pride. Like her worth could be measured in a single note, a joke to make them laugh over dessert. Her fingers itched with a strange mix of anger and memory. She could almost hear her father's voice in her head. "Music isn't for showing off. It's for telling the truth." She looked at the piano. Its black surface reflected her face back at her, faint and distorted under the low lights. She could walk away. She could pretend she didn't care. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet spark began to burn. The owner glanced at her from across, the room silently urging her to do it. The rest of the staff had paused, watching from the edges, waiting to see if she'd say yes or turn her back on the millionaire. Anna stepped closer to the piano. She didn't touch the money. She didn't even look at Caldwell. She slid the tray she was carrying onto a side table, then pulled out the piano stool. The wood creaked slightly as she sat down. The room shifted, conversations lowered, the clinking of silverware stopped. All eyes were on her. She rested her hands above the keys but didn't press down yet. Caldwell smirked, leaning back in his chair like he was waiting for the punchline to a joke only he understood. Anna took a slow breath. She didn't owe him a performance. But maybe, just maybe, she owed herself a reminder of who she used to be. And as the room held its breath, she let her fingers drop, playing a single, clear note that cut through the air like glass. The note hung in the air longer than it should have. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it had a certain weight to it. Some of the guests exchanged quick glances, as if unsure whether to laugh or stay quiet. Mr. Caldwell raised an eyebrow, the smirk still playing at the edge of his lips. "That's it?" he said, tapping his glass with a finger. "Come on now, give us a song, something cheerful." His voice carried the same tone someone might use with a street performer they didn't really respect. Anna's eyes stayed on the keys. She hadn't sat at a piano in so long that her fingertips felt foreign against the smooth ivory. Memories were already coming back in, flickers her father's calloused hands, showing her where to place her fingers. Her mother's soft humming from the kitchen, the applause at her last recital. Long before her life had been swallowed by bills and late-night shifts, she glanced at the $100 bill resting on the piano lid. It felt like a dare. A small pile of paper meant to measure her worth. Part of her wanted to ignore it completely and walk away. But another part, deep and stubborn, wanted to show them that music wasn't just a trick for their amusement. From behind her, one of the guests chuckled. "Don't be shy, sweetheart. We're all friends here." The words weren't cruel on the surface, but they carried that same sharp edge, the one that told her she wasn't being seen as a person, but as entertainment. Anna took a slow breath and rested both hands on the keys. She decided she wasn't going to play something loud or impressive. She wasn't here to win their approval. If she was going to play, she would play something that meant something to her. The first few notes came soft, almost hesitant. It was a piece her father had once played when she was sick as a child. A melody that seemed to slow the world down. Even back then, it had made her feel safe. Now, sitting in front of strangers, it felt like reaching into the deepest corner of herself and pulling something fragile into the open. The sound was different in this room. The piano was old, but its tone had warmth, like it remembered every song ever played on it. Each note floated up toward the chandeliers and seemed to linger. A waiter stopped in the middle of pouring wine just to listen. A woman in a silver dress tilted her head, her conversation forgotten mid-sentence. Mr. Caldwell shifted in his seat. His smirk had faded just slightly, though he still looked like he was waiting for her to slip. But she didn't. Her fingers found the right places without needing to think. Years of muscle memory coming back with every measure. Anna wasn't looking at the guests anymore. Her eyes had dropped to the keys, her shoulders loose, her body moving with the rise and fall of the melody. And for the first time that evening, she forgot where she was. She forgot about the polished floors, the clinking glasses, the weight of eyes watching her. All that existed was the piano and the sound filling the room. The laughter that had filled the space earlier was gone now. No one was making jokes or whispering to the person next to them. Even the sound of cutlery had stopped. The music had pulled them into something quieter, something they hadn't expected from a waitress. Anna knew she could have stopped after the first verse. She could have made her point and ended there. But something inside her told her to keep going. Not for them, not even for Caldwell, but for the little girl who once believed music could change the way people felt. Halfway through, she caught sight of her reflection again on the black surface of the piano. This time, it didn't look tired. It didn't look like someone weighed down by double shifts and hospital bills. It looked like someone who still had a piece of her old self left. And that piece was alive in every note she played. When the final line of the melody came, her fingers slowed. She let the last note hang in the air. And for a brief second, no one moved. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty, it was full of something none of them could quite name. Then, almost reluctantly, someone at the far end of the table began to clap. It wasn't the loud, showy applause of people trying to be polite. It was slower, more deliberate, and soon others joined in. Anna didn't smile, didn't bow, didn't reach for the money. She simply stood, pushed the stool back in, and went to pick up her tray from the side table. As she turned to leave, she caught Caldwell watching her, his expression unreadable now. The smirk was gone. placed by something else, something quieter. But she didn't stay to figure out what. It meant her work wasn't finished for the night. And she had no interest in turning her music into a transaction. The $100 bill stayed where it was. Unclaimed, like a challenge she had accepted and won without ever saying a word. Anna walked away from the piano as if nothing had happened, her tray balanced in her hands, her steps steady, but inside. Her chest was still warm from the music. It was a warmth she hadn't felt in years, like a long-lost friend had returned. For a brief moment, she moved through the tables, refilling water, collecting empty plates. Pretending she didn't notice the small changes in the room. The glances from guests who now looked at her with a kind of curiosity rather than dismissal. The waiter at the bar who gave her the slightest nod of respect as she passed. At Caldwell's table, atmosphere had shifted. The guests weren't laughing as loudly anymore. Some were leaning in close, speaking in low voices. And Caldwell himself was still sitting back in his chair, one hand resting on his wine glass, the other tapping the table absent-mindedly. He was watching her. Anna kept her focus on her work, but she could feel it, the weight of his gaze following her movements, not with the same smugness as before, but with a kind of calculation, as if he was trying to place her in a category he didn't recognize. When she returned to the side station to drop off dishes, the restaurant's owner approached. "That was something," he said quietly, almost as if he didn't want to admit it. "You should play more often when we have big clients." Anna shook her head. "I'm not here to play piano. I'm here to work." The owner frowned, but didn't push the point. He knew she had made her choice, and her choice had not been for him or for tips. Still, the music lingered in the air long after the last note had faded. Some guests kept glancing toward the piano like they expected her to return to it. Others seemed lost in thought. And one older gentleman at a corner table quietly told his wife she played that like it mattered. Anna didn't hear him, but she could feel the truth of it in the way her hands still tingled from the keys. A short while later, Caldwell motioned for her to come over. She considered pretending not to see him, but ignoring the wealthiest man in the room was not the kind of thing the owner would forgive. So she walked over, her expression polite but unreadable. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "You didn't take the money," he said. "It wasn't for sale," she replied simply. His mouth twitched, maybe amusement, maybe something else. "You could have, though. You earned it. More than earned it." "I wasn't playing for you," she said, and then, after a pause, "I wasn't playing for anyone here." He leaned back, studying her. It was clear he wasn't used to people speaking to him like that, especially not someone carrying an order pad and wearing a simple black apron. Finally, he smiled, not the smirk from before, but something closer to genuine. "Well," he said, "if you ever change your mind, I'd like to hear more." Anna gave the kind of polite smile you give when you have no intention of following through, then turned and walked away before he could say more. In the kitchen, the air was hot and loud, but even there, the ripple of what had happened reached her. One of the younger waiters grinned at her. "You didn't tell us you could play." Anna shrugged, setting plates on the pass. "It's not important." "Looked important to him," the waiter said, jerking his chin toward the dining room. Anna didn't respond. She didn't want to give the moment more weight than it deserved, but she also knew something had shifted, not just in the way the guests saw her, but in the way she saw herself. It had been years since she let herself feel that alive, and she couldn't decide if it scared her or gave her hope later. As the evening slowed and guests began leaving, Anna wiped down her last table and moved toward the piano one final time. The $100 bill was still there, crisp, untouched, waiting. She looked at it for a moment, then reached out not to take it, but to close the piano lid gently, her fingertips brushing the wood as if saying goodbye. This wasn't her stage. And tonight wasn't about winning approval or earning tips. It was about remembering something she thought she'd lost as she turned away. She caught Caldwell watching her again from across the room, his expression still unreadable, but this time she didn't feel small under his gaze. She walked back to the kitchen, the echo of that single, pure note still alive in her mind. And quietly, without telling anyone, she decided something. If she ever played again, it would be on her own terms, not for money, not for show, but for the truth she could tell through music. The same truth her father had once taught her. The piano lid stayed closed for the rest of the night. But the image of Anna sitting there, head bent slightly, fingers brushing the keys, lingered in people's minds. By the time the dinner service slowed, only a few tables remained. The hum of quiet conversation replaced the earlier bursts of laughter. It was in that softer atmosphere that Caldwell called out again, his voice carrying across the room. "Play one more," he said, not loud, not mocking this time. Anna, standing near the service station, didn't move. She was tired, her feet aching from hours of walking, and she didn't want to turn the night into some kind of encore performance. But something about his tone was different, less like a challenge, more like a request. The owner, polishing glasses at the bar, looked at her and gave a small nod. The kind that wasn't really a question. Anna hesitated, then walked to the piano again. She didn't look at the $100 bill still resting there from earlier, didn't even glance toward Caldwell's table. Instead, she pulled out the stool, sat down, and let her hands hover over the keys. The first note came, quite almost a whisper. It wasn't chosen to impress or to show skill. It was chosen because it felt right. A single warm tone that cut through the low murmur of the room. It carried the same weight as before, but this time there was no tension behind it, tonally calm. Somewhere behind her, a fork clinked softly against a plate and then went still. A chair creaked as someone leaned forward. Even the kitchen door, swinging open with a waiter's movement, seemed to pause. The note lingered. Then another followed, and another, each one placed carefully, as if she were building something fragile that could break if rushed. The song wasn't famous. It wasn't flashy or fast. It was something she had pieced together over the years. Half her father's melodies, half her own additions. A tune that carried the sound of rainy afternoons, of open windows in spring, of a quiet house where music filled the spaces words couldn't. Her fingers moved with a kind of certainty that came not from recent practice, but from years of letting music live somewhere deep inside her, even when she wasn't playing. At Caldwell's table, no one spoke. A woman in a dark blue dress set her wine glass down without taking a sip. The older gentleman from earlier leaned back with closed eyes, and Caldwell himself sat straighter, his usual air of control replaced with something harder to name. Anna felt none of it directly. She was too far inside the music now, following it like a path she knew by heart. The piano's sound was richer than she remembered, as if the old instrument had been waiting for someone to play it with care again. Her left hand gave the piece its quiet rhythm, while her right hand traced the melody, and for those few minutes, the time in the restaurant seemed to stretch and fold around the sound. She reached a part of the song that always made her pause, a gentle rise, a sudden hush, the kind of moment where the next note could either break the spell or deepen it. Her fingers hovered, then came down in a chord that felt like the release of something long held back. It filled the room not with volume but with presence, wrapping itself around every listener like a shared breath. In that instant, Anna remembered playing for her father in their small living room, how he would sit with his eyes closed, letting the sound wash over him. She remembered the smell of coffee in the kitchen, the faint creak of the old floor when her mother walked past. The music wasn't just notes, it was all of that, alive again for just a moment. The piece began to wind toward its end. She slowed her hands, letting the melody settle gently instead of cutting off. The final note came almost reluctantly, as though it didn't want to leave the air. It lingered, then faded into silence. No one moved. The restaurant felt like it was holding its breath. Anna sat there for a few seconds, her hands resting lightly on the keys, not needing applause, not waiting for it. Then, slowly a sound began. Not the quick clapping of polite guests, but the steady, heartfelt rhythm of people who had been genuinely moved. Anna stood, pushed the stool in, and without a word, walked back toward the service station. She didn't glance back at Caldwell's table. She didn't need to. The music had spoken for her, and she knew they'd heard it. But as she passed the bar, the owner stopped her. "You should play every week," he said softly. Anna shook her head with a faint smile. No, not for the room. Matters. In her mind, she could still hear the first note, clear and certain. The one that had changed the tone of the entire evening, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. The sound of her last note still seemed to float in the air, as if it had decided to linger a little longer before fading away completely. Anna had returned to her work, wiping down a table near the far wall, but the restaurant no longer felt like the same place it had been just an hour earlier. Something had changed, and not just for her. The guests spoke differently now, their voices softer, their words slower, as though they were still carrying a part of the melody in their minds. Even the clinking of cutlery sounded gentler, like the music had settled into the corners of the room and was holding everything in place. At Caldwell's table, no one was laughing anymore. The woman in the dark blue dress leaned toward the man beside her, speaking in a hushed voice. The older gentleman kept glancing at the piano, his expression thoughtful, and Caldwell himself sat quietly, fingers resting on the stem of his wineglass, turning it slowly but not drinking. His eyes followed Anna every time she passed by, not in the way he had looked at her before, but with the focus of someone replaying a scene in his mind and trying to understand why it mattered. One of the other waiters slipped by Anna's side, whispering, "They're still talking about it, you know?" She gave him a small shrug. "It was just a song. Maybe to you," he said, "but to them. I think you woke them up a little." Anna didn't reply. She wasn't sure she liked the idea of waking people up. Music to her wasn't about making statements or changing minds. It was about telling the truth quietly, without forcing it. They'd heard it, fine. If they hadn't, that was fine too. A couple from a table near the piano stopped her on their way out. "You played beautifully," the woman said, her smile warm and genuine. The man beside her added, "It's been a long time since I heard a piece that made me forget where I was." Anna thanked them, keeping her voice polite but steady, not letting the praise pull her out of the calm she felt inside. But in the corner of the room, Caldwell's table remained. They were the last to order dessert, the last to refill their glasses. And it was clear they were in no rush to leave when Anna came by to clear a few empty plates. One of the guests, a man in a gray suit, leaned back and said, "You could make money doing that, you know? You've got a gift." Anna gave a polite nod but didn't answer. Caldwell, however, did. "She's not interested in money," he said quietly, not looking at the man but at Anna. It was the first thing he'd said to her in a way that didn't sound like a challenge. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and she could tell he understood. At least a little dot in the kitchen, the staff whispered about her between orders. Some thought she should play more often. Others said the charm of the moment was that it was rare, unexpected. Anna kept moving, her hands busy, but her mind kept drifting back to the piano. It wasn't the attention she missed. It was the feeling of connection. That strange thread between her and the room while the music was alive, when she stepped out into the dining area again. The lighting seemed softer, the atmosphere less, like a high-end dinner, and more like a shared space between strangers. People lingered over their drinks instead of rushing for the door. Some stayed just to talk quietly, as though they didn't want to break whatever the music had left behind. It reminded her of evenings back home, when her father would play and neighbors would stop by, not for a performance, but to sit, listen, and let the world slow down for a while. Near closing time, Caldwell stood, buttoning his jacket as his party prepared to leave. He didn't go straight for the exit. Instead, he walked to the piano, looked at the closed lid, then at the $100 bill still resting on top, without a word. He picked it up, not in frustration, but almost in respect, as if he'd realized it didn't belong there anymore. When he passed Anna on the way out, he paused. "That song," he said, "it'll stay with me." And then he was gone, leaving her unsure whether he meant it or if it was just another thing rich people said. But later, when the last table was cleared and the chairs were stacked, Anna walked to the piano again. She ran her fingers over the closed lid, not opening it, not playing, just feeling the cool wood under her hands. The shift in the room had been real. She'd seen it in their faces, heard it in the silence between the notes, and for the first time in a long while, she, allowed herself to believe that maybe the part of her she thought was gone had only been waiting for the right moment to return. The restaurant was nearly empty. But in Anna's mind, the night wasn't over. She stayed behind after the last guest had gone, helping the other waiters stack chairs and wipe down tables. The sound of clinking glasses and running water came from the kitchen, but it all felt distant, as if she were still sitting at the piano with her fingers on the keys. When she finally took off her apron, she noticed the piano again sitting. In the corner, under the soft light, silent now, but not empty, something inside her pulled her toward it. She told herself she was just making sure it was clean, that no one had left anything on it, but her feet carried her there like they had. Their own plan. She opened the lid slowly, the faint scent of old wood and polish rising up. Her fingers brushed over the keys, cool and smooth. And before she could talk herself out of it, she pressed a quiet note, not meant for anyone else. Just for her. The sound stirred something deep. It's not the memory of tonight, but something older, something from years ago. She was back in her childhood home. Small living room with mismatched furniture and the faint smell of coffee. Her father was there, sitting beside her on the old upright piano, his arm resting lightly on the back of her chair. You don't have to play it perfectly, he had told her. Just play it like you mean it. People will feel that. She remembered how his hands moved, not stiff or tense, but loose and alive, like the music wasn't something he was forcing out, but something that was already there, waiting to be shared. She remembered the way her mother would hum along from the kitchen, pretending not to listen while she made tea, and how the sunlight would hit the keys in the afternoon, making them look like they were glowing. In the quiet of the restaurant, Anna let herself follow the memory. Her fingers began to move, not in a planned way, but in the same natural rhythm she had learned as a child. She wasn't playing for a crowd, or for money, or even for the guests who had been moved earlier that night. She was playing for the people who weren't there anymore, for her father, for her mother in those warm afternoons, and for the younger version of herself who had believed that music could hold the world together. Each note seemed to carry a piece of that past into the present. The high keys brought the laughter of summer days. The low keys carried the comfort of winter nights by the fire. There was a sadness in it, too, the kind that doesn't crush you. It wraps around you like an old blanket, reminding you of what you've lost and what you've kept. She didn't notice the dishwasher coming out of the kitchen until he spoke softly. Didn't mean to interrupt, he said, leaning on the doorway. Anna stopped playing and gave a small smile. It's fine. It's remembering. He nodded slowly, as if he understood without needing details. Then he disappeared back into the kitchen. Leaving her alone with the piano, Anna kept playing until the clock told her it was too late to stay any longer. When she finally let the last note fade, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything she had just poured into the keys. She closed the lid gently, running her hand across the smooth surface one last time before stepping away. On her walk home, the city felt different. It was still the same streets, the same late-night hum of traffic, the same neon lights blinking above quiet shops. But inside, she carried the calm that only music gave her, the feeling of having touched something real, even if only for herself. She thought about how easy it would be to let that part of her fade again, to let work and bills and exhaustion take over. But tonight had reminded her that it was still there, waiting, like an unopened letter from someone you loved. When she reached her small apartment, she didn't turn on the TV or check her phone. She sat by the window, the night air cooled against her face, hummed the melody she had played earlier. It was strange, she had gone years without playing, and yet the music had been sitting inside her all along, ready to return the moment. She gave it room, and now that she'd let it out, she knew she couldn't put it away again. The next evening, the restaurant was busy again. Different crowd, same golden light from the chandeliers, the same polished tables lined neatly in rows. But for Anna, there was an echo of the night before in everything she saw. Every time she passed the piano, she could almost feel the weight of her fingers on the keys again. She wasn't sure if she wanted to play tonight. She hadn't planned to. But there was a quiet pull, like the piano was waiting, halfway through the shift. The door opened, and to her surprise, Caldwell walked in. He wasn't with the same large party this time. Only one man accompanied him, and they took a small table near the middle of the room. Anna felt a flicker of curiosity. Why come back so soon? This wasn't the kind of place millionaires visited twice in 2 days without a reason. When she passed by to deliver water, Caldwell looked up at her. "Do you play every night?" he asked. "No," she replied, her voice calm. "I don't." "Shame," he said, almost under his breath. She gave a small smile and moved on, but she could feel his eyes following her again. Not in the way they had that first night, not with the same arrogance. This time, there was something softer there. Later, as the dinner rush eased, the owner approached her with an odd look. "Caldwell asked if you'd play again," he said. Anna paused, drying her hands on a towel. "And you told him? That it's your choice?" Her first instinct was to say no. She didn't want to turn her music into something expected. Something people could just request like another bottle of wine. But then she thought about the night before, the way the room had shifted, the way she had felt more like herself in those few minutes than in years. She walked to the piano without announcing it, pulled out the stool, and sat down. The conversation in the restaurant softened almost instantly, like people knew what was about to happen. She didn't look at Caldwell, didn't look at anyone. Her hands hovered above the keys, and then she began. This time she didn't start with a single note. She began with a slow chord, rich and full, the kind that feels like the opening of a door. The melody came easily, flowing into the room like warm light. She wasn't performing. She was telling a story without words, a story only she could tell. Halfway through, she closed her eyes, letting her hands move on their own. The restaurant around her faded. It was just her and the music, the rhythm steady like a heartbeat, the melody rising and falling like a voice in conversation. Near the end, she reached the part she always saved for last, the moment she called the final chord in her mind. It was simple, not loud or dramatic, but it held everything she wanted to say. Strength, memory, hope, and a touch of sadness. Her fingers pressed down gently, letting the sound bloom and fade until there was nothing left but the quiet. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then the applause began soft at first, but growing into something that filled the room. Anna stood, pushed the stool in, and gave a small nod before walking back toward the service station as she passed Caldwell's table. He spoke. "That last note," he said, "felt like you were saying goodbye to something." She paused, then replied, "Maybe I was." For a moment, they simply looked at each other. There was no smirk this time, no challenge in his eyes, just understanding. He didn't offer her money. He didn't try to make a speech. He simply said, "Thank you," and turned back to his meal. When her shift ended, the restaurant was quiet again. The piano sat in the corner, its keys hidden beneath the closed lid. Anna walked over, rested her hand on the smooth wood, and smiled. Faintly to herself, the final chord was still in her head, still warm in her chest. She didn't know when she would play again, but she knew she would. And when she did, it would be because she had something to say, because someone else asked. The next morning, sunlight poured into Anna's small apartment, warming the floor where her shoes sat neatly by the door. She made coffee the same way she always did, 2 spoons of sugar. Just enough milk to soften the bitterness. But the morning didn't feel like every other morning. There was still a trace of last night's music in her head, as if the final chord had stretched itself into today. She found herself humming the melody without thinking, her hands tapping an invisible rhythm against her coffee mug. By the time she walked into work, the day's staff was already buzzing with talk about what had happened the past 2 nights. "You?" "No, there were people asking about you after you left," one of the waiters told her. "I wanted to know your name, your story, like you were some kind of secret they'd just discovered." Anna shook her head, smiling a little. "It was just a song?" The waiter raised an eyebrow. "Maybe to you, but not to them." Around lunchtime, the restaurant's owner called her into his office, sat behind his desk, papers stacked high on either side. "I've been thinking," he began, "you could play on weekends. We could advertise at live piano with dinner. People would come for it." Anna hesitated. She knew the offer came from a business angle. but it also came with the risk of turning something personal into a routine performance. She imagined sitting at the piano every Friday night, not because she felt like it, but because it was on the schedule. The thought made her chest feel tight. "I appreciate it," she said carefully, "but I can't promise that. I only play when it matters." The owner looked puzzled but didn't push. He just nodded slowly and waved her out. That evening, as she was setting up for dinner service, a woman walked in holding a small envelope. She wasn't there to eat, just to deliver something. "This is from the man you played for," she said. With a small smile, "He asked me to give it to you." Anna took the envelope and thanked her, her curiosity stirring, when she opened it later in the staff room. Inside was a short note written in neat handwriting. "You reminded me of something. I'd forgotten. Thank you, see." There was no money inside, just the note. And somehow that felt more valuable than the $100 bill he'd offered on the first night. The weeks passed, and every so often, Anna would find herself sitting at the piano. After closing, playing softly in the dim light, letting the music fill the empty room. Sometimes another staff member would pause to listen before heading out. Sometimes no one was there at all, and the sound belonged only to her. She didn't plan these moments, they simply happened when she felt the need. And each time, the music carried pieces of her past and pieces of her present, binding them together into something whole. One cold evening, just as she was about to leave for the night, the dishwasher approached her shyly. "My little sister plays," he said. "She's scared to perform in front of people. If I bring her here one day after hours, would you show her how you do it?" Anna thought about it for a moment, then smiled. "Yes, bring her." She didn't think of herself as a teacher, but she knew what it felt like to have music inside you and be afraid to share it. If she could help someone else find the courage to play, it would be worth it. Not long after, she found herself sitting beside the girl at the piano, showing her that perfection didn't matter, only sincerity. The girl's small hands stumbled over the notes at first, but when she finally played a clean chord, her face lit up. And Anna saw a reflection of her own younger self in that smile. On her walk home that night, the city lights seemed warmer. Somehow, the air sharper against her skin. She thought about how the whole thing had started, a wealthy man's careless attempt to humiliate her, and how it had turned into something entirely different. She hadn't planned for any of it, but maybe that was the point. Music wasn't about planning, it was about showing up when the moment called for it, and giving what you had inside, even if it was just one honest note. When she reached her apartment, she set her bag down, sat at the small electric keyboard by the window, and began to play. The sound wasn't as rich as the grand piano at the restaurant, but it didn't matter. Her fingers moved easily, the melody rising and falling in the quiet of her own space, and when she reached the final chord, she held it just a little longer, letting it fill the room before it faded into silence. It wasn't the end, just another beginning.